morning, and welcome to the MEER Report, the Minority and Women Economic Equity Report, where we explore, discuss, and offer solutions to issues on African American and minority businesses in New Orleans. The MEER Report is brought to you by the Collaborative and the Collaborative Community Initiative. By way of introduction, the Collaborative is an association of African American and minority businesses dedicated to leveling the playing field by changing public policy, by being a public advocate for minority businesses, and by monitoring compliance on DBE contracts. The Collaborative was instrumental in rewriting the current DBE ordinance, developing the 2018 Economic Disparity Study, and mounting a continuing effort to bring about economic equity in our procurement system. Our sister organization, the Collaborative Community Initiative, is our nonprofit entity which provides business and organizational education, community services, and community education when it comes to business. In this segment, we will discuss the alarming statistics revealed in the City of New Orleans 2018 Economic Disparity Study Report. On your screen is an excerpt from the report, which shows that when it comes to construction contracting, African American firms make up 23% of the available firms, but only receive 11% of city contracts. In the city, with an African American population of over 60%, this is appalling. This disparity helps to drive high unemployment rates, high poverty rates, high crime rates, low home ownership rates, increase in generational wealth gap, which we all need to correct. So let's discuss some of the obstacles that contribute to this disparity. First, access to capital. The report also outlines that minorities are denied credit and loans 51% of the time, when credit and other factors are the same as their white counterparts. Bonding capabilities. In order to bid these jobs as a prime contractor, our companies must be bonded. The Louisiana Economic Development Authority, LED, offers only $100,000 in bonding assistance, while most construction contracts are $500,000 and above. Recently, we have seen an influx in white women being certified as DBEs, although they have vast financial resources and connections. Compliance monitoring. The Office of Supply Diversity is not sufficiently staffed to enforce compliance of many of these contracts. Giant contracts, large contracts that could be broken up into smaller contracts, should be done so that smaller firms can take advantage of these contracts. And lastly, we still have that good old boy system and political cronyism. Here are some of the examples of our recent contracts issued by the City of New Orleans. Construction of police stations and buildings, fire station buildings, municipal buildings, community centers, roads and street repair contracts worth millions and millions of dollars. This system has relegated minority contractors as permanent subcontractors rather than uplifting them to prime contractor status. Please stay with us after the commercial break to discuss what's going on in the private sector with construction contracts. You won't believe it. The Collaborative, fighting for minority businesses, changing public policy, leveling the playing field, studying the data, an advocate for minority businesses, monitoring DBE compliance. The Collaborative, we're fighting for you. Welcome back. In the next slide, there's an excerpt from the 2018 City of New Orleans Disparity Study, which shows an astonishing revelation. When it comes to private construction contracts, African American firms receive only 1% of private non-government contracts, while white firms receive 93% of private contracts. Again, in a city where African Americans make up 60% of the population, our firms receive 1% of private construction contracts. There is essentially a monopoly in construction in this city. The combined effects of city contracts and private contracts going to majority firms is devastating to the African American community. The lack of diversity in this area of business is crippling the minority community. Billions of dollars have been spent on hotels, office complexes, schools, and retail establishments. How could this possibly be? Well, we think we have an assessment of how this happens. Our assessment of this situation is this. In New Orleans, majority-owned firms only engage and support African American and minority firms if they are forced to do so. If there's no mandate, they simply will not engage and support the minority construction community. If there is a mandate, many times they will try to find a workaround. We effectively have segregation in the city of New Orleans construction industry. The report further states that Hispanic American firms receive 0.8% of private contracts, and Asian American firms receive 0.3% of private work. In a city which promotes itself as being multicultural and diverse, this is shameful. Let's dive deeper into the circle of construction segregation. When African American and minority firms can't get work, they can't hire and retain project managers, estimators, site supervisors, and skilled labor. So there's effectively a monopoly on the construction labor in this city. We suggest that this pattern is by design. You can see the same or similar patterns in the hotel industry, the retail industry, the food service industry, the hospitality industry, and more. When we look at the data, this pattern helps to consolidate poverty in our community. If there were no jobs, if our businesses can't survive and thrive, our communities suffer. In recent days, you have heard the term follow the data, or our decisions are driven by data. So why aren't our city leaders following the data on Black economic equity issues? Why is there so little comprehensive efforts to correct this disparity? Why is so little attention being given to how the Black community is doing economically? If there would be a rallying cry from the community, it would be, economically, we can't breathe. And now, with the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, this issue is even more critical. After the break, we will discuss how some real solutions have been presented to the city leaders, both the city council and the city administration. The Collaborative, fighting for minority businesses, changing public policy, leveling the playing field, studying the data, and advocate for minority businesses, monitoring DBE compliance. The Collaborative, we're fighting for you. In this segment, we will discuss some possible solutions and best practices recommendations that are presented to the city administration and to the city council. In our experience, it's not enough to ask your political and business leaders to fix the problems. You have to know what you want. First, we want to unbundle large contracts. Not all contracts have to be large, $10, $20, and $30 million contracts. Why should small companies have to compete with large multi-million-dollar firms? We recommend that large contracts be unbundled and set aside only for smaller firms to bid on as prime contractors. This way, this will produce a consistent pool of work for the smaller firms. An example of this is the City of New Orleans demolition contract. This could have easily been divided into 2 contracts rather than 1. Another example is the trucking contracts at the City of New Orleans Airport. A consortium of African American trucking firms organized themselves to compete for this contract. Instead of unbundling the contract, it was given to one contractor who in turn hired many smaller firms, i.e. subcontractors. When it comes to unbundling of contracts, it's not a matter of can it be done, it's a matter of being intentional and creative. This would not require any new legislation, new laws, or programs. It's just a matter of political will. Our next proposed solution is providing increased bonding assistance. The Louisiana Department of Economic Development, LED, at one time provided $250,000 of bonding assistance to minority firms. Governor Jindal reduced that amount as soon as he got in office to $100,000. The current governor, to a great extent, owes his re-election to African American voters. So this is not an unreasonable ask. Providing this level of bonding assistance will help many firms to bid as unbundled contracts and to bid them as prime contractors rather than subcontractors. It effectively creates a pipeline of smaller African American and minority prime contractors. Next, we need committed and sustained enforcement of DBE regulations. The current Office of Supply Diversity has 7 employees. The City of Houston has many more than that. So does Atlanta and Memphis. A direct indication of intentionality of the administration is its budget, staffing, and verbal support for diversity and equity. This is where the rubber meets the road. Our city leaders, both administration and city council, must make it clear that this is a priority, and they must not bend to outside pressure. Currently, the DBE ordinance requires that all city departments, attached and unattached boards and commissions abide by the ordinance. However, this is not being done consistently. The Office of Supply Diversity has that task to do. Lastly, we must have a disparity study completed every 4 to 5 years. It is important because legally we have to measure the progress or the lack of progress in order to develop measures, programs, or systems to affect change. This is why the good old boys object to consistent disparity studies. You can't follow the data if there is no data to follow. Prior to the 2018 disparity study, the last study was done over 20 years ago. During that period, the Association of General Contractors argued that dismantling the minority programs was best because there was no data to confirm that they were needed. And thus we have little progress to show for over 20 years in the city of New Orleans during this period. Procurement process had been hampered. We refuse to let this happen again. We are demanding that regular disparity studies be included in the city charter. It should not depend on who's in office. It should be intentional. Well, there you have it. The MEER report, the Minority and Women Economic Equity Report, brings you the issues, the data, and the proposed solutions. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned to our next program, which will focus on professional service contracts in the city of New Orleans. Thanks to our sponsors, the Collaborative and the Collaborative Community Initiative, and our podcast partners, NOLA.tv. You can find us on all social media platforms and at the Collaborative website or on NOLA.tv. Until then, remember, when you go to power without a base, your demand becomes a request. Thank you for watching.